right, so listen to this. We're going to be diving deep into arguing effectively in English today. And trust me, this is going to be way more than just like, oh, winning those arguments, those wars of words. You actually sent us this YouTube video. It's from Daily Native English, and it's called How to Argue in English Confidently. And we're going to, break down those tips and tricks in there. But really the point is to help you sound super confident and convincing, especially if you know English isn't your native language.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we're really going beyond just learning like phrases,
Yeah.
right? We're going to talk about building persuasive power, the kind you can use in, your everyday situations. Like, think about, meetings, presentations, or even just like friendly debates, those ones that just pop up at like the dinner table.
Oh, totally. I remember when I was early in my career, I used to be terrified to speak up in meetings, especially when I had to disagree with someone who was like way more senior than me.
Oh, yeah, no, it's totally natural to feel that way. But, here's the thing. There are all these studies that show that people who can debate well tend to be more successful. And that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Because being able to express your ideas clearly and with confidence, that is a huge asset no matter what field you're in.
Okay, so let's break down this video and see like what we can find, what gems we can uncover. And the first thing that really jumped out at me was the PRFP method. Point, reason, example, point. It's such a simple framework, but why is it so effective?
Well, it comes down to how our brains process information. We're way more likely to remember and be persuaded by arguments that are like structured and easy to follow.
Hmm.
And the PRE method, it provides that structure. It's like a roadmap for your argument.
Well, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And in the video, they actually use an example of arguing for mandatory recycling, just to show how PRP works.
Right. So your point would be like, recycling should be mandatory. And then you'd give like a reason, like, because it significantly reduces landfill waste and it helps protect the environment.
Okay, but just a reason by itself, that might not be enough to convince someone, so that's where the example comes in, right?
Exactly. And the key here is to use a really strong and compelling example to back up that point. The video suggests using data from a city that has a successful recycling program. So something like, in cities like San Francisco, mandatory recycling programs have been shown to cut landfill waste by as much as 50%.
Whoa, yeah, that's way more persuasive than just saying, like, recycling is good, right? You're like fitting them with hard facts.
It's about appealing to logic and emotion at the same time. So the reason, that's kind of tugs at the heartstrings. And then the example seals the deal with their mind. And then, of course, you got to circle back to your point,
Right,
like,
yeah.
that's why I believe recycling should be mandatory.
So it's about clarity and reinforcement, right?
Right.
I love that. But let's be honest, arguing, especially a second language, can be so intimidating.
Yeah, it's totally understandable to feel that way. Nobody wants to come across as aggressive or disrespectful, especially when you're still like trying to master all the nuances of English.
So how do we strike that balance, like between being assertive but also being polite?
Well, the video gives some really great phrases that you can use to disagree respectfully. Like, you could say things like, I see your point, but,
Yeah.
or could we consider a different perspective?
I use those all the time. They're like my magic words. They diffuse all the tension and they
Yeah.
keep the conversation going.
Exactly. They're a great way to acknowledge the other person's view while still, creating space for you to like present your own. And, that actually leads us to another crucial point that the video makes, and that's the importance of backing up your claims. You really need solid evidence.
Oh, right. Just saying things like, I think, or I believe,
Yeah.
that just doesn't carry the same weight as, actually supporting your statement, with facts and data examples.
Yeah, it's the difference between just stating an opinion and building a strong case.
And what's cool? The video gives us some great phrases to help weave in those facts.
Yeah.
Things like, according to recent studies, or let me give you an example.
Exactly. Those phrases really add a lot of weight and credibility to your argument. So let's say you're trying to argue that hybrid work boosts productivity. Well, instead of just like stating your opinion, you could say something like, studies have shown that companies with hybrid work models see an average increase of 20% in employee productivity.
Boom. Now you've got their attention.
Right? And that's how you can transform just like a simple opinion into a really persuasive argument.
Oh, I love that. But even if you have the best evidence, you've got to be ready for counter arguments, right? Those
Yeah.
are totally inevitable, in any debate.
Oh, absolutely. And the video really emphasizes this. It emphasizes the importance of handling those counterpoints gracefully,
Yeah.
which can be, pretty tricky even for native English speakers.
Totally. So how do we navigate those moments without just derailing the whole conversation.
The key is to just stay calm, acknowledge the other person's viewpoint, and then present your own perspective. And phrases like, "That's a valid perspective, however," or "I understand your concerns, but," can be really helpful here. Yeah, it's like building a bridge. Instead of putting up a wall, you're showing respect for their ideas, but you're still standing your ground.
I love that analogy. So it's really about finding that common ground and having a really productive exchange,
Yeah.
even when there are differences.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. The video actually suggests this practice technique, and it seems almost too simple, but it's so smart.
Yeah.
And that's debating with yourself.
Wait, like arguing with myself in the mirror?
Well, not necessarily in the mirror, but yeah, like pick a topic and then argue both sides. So, be both the proponent and the opponent.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful for like practicing your language skills,
Yeah.
but are there like deeper benefits to that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. You're basically working out your critical thinking muscles. By making yourself consider both sides of an issue, you start to understand the topic more deeply. And you'll be able to anticipate counter-arguments better, and you'll just become a much stronger communicator.
Oh, so it's like a workout for your brain. I like that. And the video actually uses the example of debating the pros and cons of school uniforms.
Right. So you could start by arguing for uniforms and maybe highlight things like, how they create a sense of unity and equality, or how they reduce distractions caused by, like, fashion choices and things.
Oh, and then you could like flip the script, right? And then you could argue against uniforms and, you could emphasize the importance of self-expression and individuality.
Exactly. And by going through this process, you're not just practicing English, you're also getting better at seeing things from different perspectives.
Which is, that is such a valuable skill no matter what you're doing, not just for formal debates, right? Okay, so we've talked about structure and evidence and how to handle those counterarguments. But what about the delivery? Even if you have like the perfect argument, if you just like mumble through it or you sound unsure of yourself, well, it's just not going to be as effective.
You're so right. The video makes a really great point about the importance of clear and engaging delivery, especially, when you're speaking in a second language.
So what are some things that, we should keep in mind when it comes to delivery?
Okay, well, first and foremost, you got to speak clearly and at a pace that your audience can actually follow. Like imagine trying to explain how technology has improved education, but you try to cram all that info into like one rushed sentence.
Oh, yeah, that would be like a jumbled mess.
Exactly. Speaking at a moderate pace, enunciating clearly, and using pauses to emphasize certain points, that can make a world of difference. And you really shouldn't underestimate the power of nonverbal communication either.
Oh, right. Like in the video where they talk about eye contact and using hand gestures.
Yeah, those nonverbal cues, they add another layer of meaning to what you're saying. So like if you make eye contact with your audience, that shows that you're confident and engaged. And using hand gestures can help you like emphasize those key points or make things more visually interesting.
So it's like adding punctuation to your words. But what about those like, those nerves that always seem to pop up?
Yeah.
Especially when you're speaking in a language that isn't your native language?
Yeah, we've all been there. But the video actually gives a great tip for dealing with those nerves.
Yeah.
And that's to prepare a few like go-to phrases in advance. So you could have something like, "That's an interesting point, but I'd like to offer another perspective."
Yeah, it's like having a little secret weapon in your back pocket. It's like those phrases buy you time to think and you can, maintain your composure, even if you're like internally freaking out.
Exactly. It's all about having the right tools so you can navigate those tricky situations with grace and confidence.
This deep dive is really making me think about just how much goes into communicating effectively, It's not just the words, it's also the delivery and the emotions you convey and even like the cultural context too.
Oh, you're so right. It's a really multifaceted skill and it takes practice, and you have to be willing to step outside of your comfort zone.
Speaking of stepping outside of our comfort zones, I'm kind of curious about how cultural differences play into all of this, like how they might influence the art of argumentation.
Ooh, that's a great question. And the video does touch on this a little bit when it talks about tone and delivery. Like, for example, in some cultures, being really direct and assertive, that might be seen as confident and persuasive. But in other cultures, that might be seen as aggressive or even like disrespectful.
So it's like there's this whole unspoken language that can vary from culture to culture.
Exactly. And being aware of those nuances, that's so important, especially when you're communicating in a global setting, you know? It's about knowing those unspoken rules and being able to adapt your style.
So how can we get better at being sensitive to these cultural differences?
Well, it all starts with being curious and being willing to learn. Pay attention to how people from different cultures communicate, both verbally and non-verbally.
Oh, and don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Like if you're not sure about something, it's always better to just clarify instead of making assumptions.
Exactly. You know, building those cross-cultural communication skills, that can open up a whole new world of understanding and connection.
Yeah, and it can help us avoid misunderstandings and, just build stronger relationships, like both personally and professionally. But even with all this knowledge and all these great techniques, arguments can still get pretty heated sometimes, especially when they touch on topics that we really care about.
Oh, that's true. It's completely natural to feel passionate about certain issues, but how do we manage those emotions and make sure that the conversation stays productive, even when things start to get intense?
That's a great question. And that's something the video didn't really talk about. What are your thoughts on how to deal with those like emotional minefields?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's all about self-awareness, like recognizing our own triggers, those topics or phrases that tend to just like push our buttons. And once you know what those triggers are, you can start to develop strategies for how to manage your reactions.
So it's like having a game plan in place, before things escalate.
Exactly. So for some people, that might look like taking a couple of deep breaths or counting to 10, or maybe even stepping away from the conversation for a minute just to like cool down.
And, remembering that it's okay to disagree. Like we don't always have to see eye to eye to have a good conversation.
That's so true. You know, disagreement can be so valuable if it's handled with respect and, a willingness to learn from each other.
Yeah, it's about shifting that mindset from I need to win to like I want to understand.
Yeah, that's such a powerful shift. And it makes it possible to connect with someone, even when you're disagreeing. And, that brings us back to how important active listening
Oh,
is.
yes. Active listening, it's not just about hearing the words. It's about really trying to understand what the other person is saying, like what their perspective is,
hmm
their emotions and motivations.
Active listening is a game changer. It shows that you're actually engaged in the conversation. You're not just waiting for your turn to speak.
And it can help us find that common ground, even when, we're in the middle of a heated debate.
It's amazing what we can learn when we're really open to listening. And, that takes us all the way back to the video's point about practicing with yourself.
Oh, right, because by arguing both sides of an issue, you're basically making yourself see the world through different lenses.
Yeah, it's like you're expanding your own ability to empathize and understand.
Mhm.
And, you might even surprise yourself and actually change your own mind along the way.
That's the best part of having an open mind, right?
Yeah.
It's a journey of discovery, not just like a battle that you need to win.
And with that in mind, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on something. The video really focuses on arguing in a one-on-one setting. But what about those times when you're arguing in front of a group? Like, say, in a classroom or in a meeting?
Oh, that's a great point. It's a totally different dynamic, right? Now you're not just trying to convince one person, you're trying to connect with a whole room full of people. And the stakes, I feel like, are much higher.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The dynamics totally change. Now it's not about one person. It's about a whole group, a diverse audience. And they all have their own, like, perspectives and objections.
Okay, so then how do we take those one-on-one argumentation skills,
Yeah.
and use them in a group setting?
Well, I think clarity and structure become even more important. That PRE method we were talking about earlier? That's a really valuable tool when you're arguing in front of a group. You start by stating your point clearly, then you give a compelling reason and back it up with some really strong examples. And then you reiterate your point. And by doing that, you're basically creating this roadmap to help your audience follow along with your argument.
Yeah, so it's like you're laying a really strong foundation for your ideas,
Yeah.
so they don't get lost.
Exactly. And remember all those polite and professional phrases we talked about? Those are even more important when you're speaking to a group. Because
Yeah.
it's so important to keep a respectful tone.
Yeah.
You want to encourage everyone to share their viewpoints and keep it open. But you don't want to alienate anyone, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because the goal isn't just to convince one person. It's to try to create this like shared understanding, or at least get everyone to acknowledge the different perspectives.
Right, exactly. And let's not forget about nonverbal communication. Things like eye contact, posture, and gestures. They can make a huge difference in how your message comes across.
I can imagine it would be even more important to project confidence and authority when you're speaking to a group,
Yeah.
especially if you're trying to, like, win them over to your side.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Maintaining eye contact with different people in the audience, using gestures to emphasize your main points, and, projecting your voice so that you're speaking clearly and confidently, all of that makes a huge difference.
It's almost like you're conducting an orchestra, right? You're leading the conversation and making sure everyone's following along.
That is such a great analogy. And just like a conductor has to be prepared and in control, you need to have a really good grasp of your argument. And you need to be able to anticipate what people might say, and you have to be flexible. You have to adjust your approach depending on how the audience is reacting.
But, let's be real. Speaking in front of a group of people, especially when you're not speaking your native language, that can be so scary.
Oh, absolutely. Those nerves are totally normal. But the good news is the more you do it, the easier it gets. And, remember all those go-to phrases. Those can be really helpful if you suddenly blank out or start to feel flustered.
Oh, yeah, it's like having a safety net.
Exactly. And, don't underestimate power of preparation. Rehearsing your argument, even if it's just by yourself in the mirror, well, that can really boost your confidence and make sure that everything flows smoothly.
So we've talked about a lot today, like the structure of arguments, the importance of delivery, and even how cultural differences play a role. But I think the main takeaway for me is like the importance of empathy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's all about recognizing that everyone has their own experiences and beliefs and values, and, those perspectives shape how they see the world.
And even when we don't agree with their perspective, we can still acknowledge it and respect it, and try to understand where they're coming from.
That's what makes communication really work, right? It's about building connections, not walls. And, it's about trying to understand each other, not just trying to win.
It's such a powerful way to think about it. It can change how we argue, how we interact with each other, how we see the world around us. So as we end this deep dive, I'm curious, what topic are you going to go practice your debating skills on? Something simple, like pizza versus burgers, or maybe something a bit more complex, something related to your work, something you're passionate about.
Whatever it is, don't be afraid to just go for it. Practice those communication skills. Have those meaningful conversations. Those conversations that can spark new ideas, help you understand things in new ways, and connect you with others.
Keep those conversations going. And hey, remember, there's a whole world of amazing topics out there just waiting to be explored.